Welcome to Diplomacy Podcast. Today I'm going to talk about China's rise. I'm going to break the episode into five movements. First, the view from the ground, what modern China looks and feels like in 2025. Second, how China builds, the engineering state, tacit knowledge, and the climb from SOX to semiconductors. Third, what the US lost and can regain about manufacturing power. Fourth, the fault lines inside China, overbuilding, social engineering, and the human desire to opt out. Fifth, the strategy question, geopolitics, the possibility of conflict, and what smart policy would look like on both sides. Then I'll close with what a serious American response should be. Not fear, not fatalism, but an honest plan. If you want to understand the rivalry with China, start in a subway station, say in Shanghai. The platforms are spotless, the arrival boards are precise. When expansion is announced, tunneling begins, track gets laid, stations open on time, and the system grows. Shanghai had roughly 500 parks not long ago. Its officials set a goal of doubling that, and the city is well on its way. Under the inevitable glass skyline, there are still dumpling shops and noodle counters on every block, all serviced by dense transit, continuous sidewalks, and public amenities that actually work. Then get out of the city, head to Guizhou, long one of China's poorer provinces, and bike for days across emerald mountains that look like they were folded by hand. You will pass some of the tallest bridges on earth and highways as smooth as a racetrack. Guizhou alone has more than 10 airports, not because every runway is profitable, but because the national plan says connectivity comes first. If you've ever driven an American rural two-lane road with crumbling shoulders and sunken culverts, you feel the difference immediately. China builds and keeps building. None of this is propaganda. It's concrete, steel, asphalt, and rebar. It's also policy, an elite that thinks like engineers, not lawyers. In the 1980s, Deng Xiaoping deliberately elevated engineers into China's top ranks as an antidote to the ideological improvisation of the Mao years. By the early 2000s, the entire Politburo Standing Committee had engineering degrees. Governance shifted from poetry to project management. You see that mentality in the physical landscape, but also in economic dial turning, pressure on leverage in real estate, crackdowns on ride sharing and online tutoring, and heavy pushes toward strategic manufacturing, electric vehicles, solar, batteries, aviation, industrial chemicals, machine tools. It's a worldview that treats the economy like a hydraulic system. Open a valve here, close a valve there, and watch the gauges. It has costs, which we'll come to. But if you start with what works, you see why a lot of Chinese citizens walk around thinking their state can still make things happen. There's a cliche that China just copies, and there's some truth in it, but it misses the core of Chinese industrial power process knowledge. Think of technology as a kitchen. Hardware is your stove and pans, blueprints and papers are the recipe. But the dish only comes out right when someone who's fried 1,000 eggs can do it with their eyes closed, adjusting heat by ear, timing by smell, correcting in motion. That tacit know how is not easily written down, and it compounds with experience. China accumulated that knowledge by making everything. First textiles and shoes, then appliances and toys, then phones and drones, then batteries and industrial robots. Shenzhen went from garment workshops to iPhone City in a decade and a half. Once you've built for Apple under maniacal tolerances, you can pivot to other complex electronics. If you've debugged a welding line for battery casings at 3 a.m., you're not intimidated by the next product turn. This was not achieved through gentle competition. A company like Meituan survived a market that started with thousands of copycats. Solar panel prices fell by an order of magnitude because dozens of Chinese firms slashed margins, scaled lines, and iterated ruthlessly. The consumer wins, the state's strategic goals advance, but investors and many firms suffer. Socialism with Chinese characteristics can look at ground level like capitalism without anesthesia. Industrial policy helped and hurt. Made in China 2025 set targets across dozens of sectors. Some hit EVs, solar, magnets, grid equipment. Others generated fraud and overcapacity. There were visible disasters, property bubbles, ghostly airports, ill starred projects. But the net effect, sector by sector, has been a moved frontier. China doesn't dominate everything. Semiconductors and large civil aviation remain hard problems. But the portfolio is wide, and the manufacturing share of world value added is enormous. Two lessons matter here. First, catch up can be innovation. Perfecting production lines, raising yields, and shrinking scrap rates are not glamorous, but they shift the global center of gravity. Second, scale is a technology. When your domestic market is gigantic, internal competition becomes a factory for world class operators. Surviving that gauntlet is itself a moat. Contrast that with the United States. Since the 1990s, many American firms chose, not were forced, to offshore manufacturing. The political bet was that services, software, and finance would carry the economy, and that trading with China would make it richer and more liberal. The first part worked on paper. The US remains rich and dynamic in tech and services. The second part didn't. China got richer without democratizing, but de-industrialization had costs that compound. Manufacturing employment fell, regions hollowed out, apex firms like Boeing and Intel stumbled, supply chains proved brittle when COVID hit. It's not just that we struggled to build ventilators and masks, it's that we had lost the muscle memory for retooling quickly. The defense base told a similar story. Munitions, drones, and shipbuilding lines proved slow to surge. You can't rebuild a factory floor by passing a resolution. Process knowledge lives in people, in supplier networks, in a thousand tiny tricks that don't make it into a spec sheet. And yet, the US is not doomed to service economy fate. The ingredients still exist: world class universities, a giant market, deep capital pools, immigration that, when we allow it, brings extraordinary talent. When America decides to build at scale, chip fabs, LNG terminals, even huge clean energy projects, it still can. The snarls are political and procedural, permitting paralysis, contradictory rules, and the habit of suing everything into the ground. There are encouraging experiments. A targeted industrial policy that actually funds factories, workforce pipelines, and long lead equipment is better than tariffs alone. Tariffs can buy time, they can't buy competence. If we rely on tariffs while starving the NSF and NIH, scaring off foreign researchers, and kneecapping universities, we end up protecting yesterday's plants while losing tomorrow's labs. So the task is not to copy China's command tools, it's to rediscover American strengths. Science funding tied to production milestones, regional manufacturing hubs that link community colleges to anchor firms, procurement that buys American and demands performance, permitting reform that accelerates good projects without hollowing environmental safeguards. The test is not ideology, it's whether steel goes up and lines turn on. If the first half of this story is about China's competence, the second half is about its overreach. Start with physical overbuilding. Bridges to nowhere are real. Local governments borrowed heavily to cover highways and dams whose returns pencil out only in PowerPoints. Cement has a carbon footprint. Displaced communities pay the human bill. If I had to assign the ratio, physical engineering in China has been mostly positive, say an 80-20 story. But the margin can shrink as projects get harder and the debt service grows. Social engineering is different. It's not 80-20. It's a moral disaster that keeps echoing. The one child policy was implemented with a technocrat's confidence and a jailer's methods. Forced sterilizations, forced abortions, quotas enforced like military campaigns, especially in the countryside. It solved a curve on a graph by breaking real bodies. The demographic consequences are now severe. A rapidly aging society with stubbornly low fertility, where cajoling citizens to have more children collides with housing costs, school pressures, and a generation that remembers coercion. Then came zero COVID. Whatever your view of pandemic policy, Shanghai's citywide lockdown, millions confined for weeks, food logistics intermittently failing, police everywhere, left scars. For a brief moment, the state's omnipotence blinked and protests flickered. But when the policy collapsed, life returned to normal. Cocktail bars reopened. People wanted to forget. The state didn't fall. It absorbed the moment and moved on. That resilience is sobering, and yet people leave. Some are rich and politically connected, hedging with kids in Western schools and houses in Vancouver. Some are journalists, artists, and coders who are tired of being watched and corrected. Some are ordinary strivers who fly to visa free countries and walk the Darien Gap to the US border, gambling that gig work in California beats stagnation at home. The numbers ebb and flow, but the signal is steady. A system that builds so much cannot entirely keep its best people inside. That cuts both ways. It stabilizes the regime by letting pressure leak. It also drains some of the creative friction that could reform the system from within. You can think of it as China's own brain circulation policy, only not by design. Now, the hard question: what does China want? There are two broad interpretations. In one, China wants to replace the US as the global hegemon, complete with ideological zeal and blue water dominance. In the other, China wants something narrower but still enormous: a self sufficient, regionally dominant, celestial empire that controls its near seas, subordinates neighbors, and reunifies Taiwan. Smart observers disagree, but the second description currently fits better. China's cultural exports lag. Its currency is not poised to replace the dollar. Its diplomacy is often transactional rather than missionary. What's not narrow is its material base. If the battlefield is East Asia, if the war is about Taiwan, not Guam or Hawaii, China's ability to mass drones, missiles, and hulls locally matters. The US Navy is still powerful. The US alliance network is real, but lead times for munitions and shipyards are long, and our procurement is sclerotic. Can the US win? Is the wrong first question. Can the US sustain? Is the right one. What about AI, the alleged trump card? Silicon Valley has a habit of prophesying singularities by 2027. Meanwhile, both the US and China remain giant nations with aging populations, fiscal constraints, and political problems that won't be automated away. I will reshape productivity and warfighting, but it won't make navies teleport or factories sprout without electricians. Betting national strategy on a single technology is an elegant way to be surprised. Europe sits in the middle of this. It faces cheap Chinese EVs and batteries on one side and American software and services on the other. Its energy costs are high, its politics are fragmented. As trade wars escalate, Europe risks being deindustrialized from both directions, trading cars for rules and watching populists thrive on the ruins. That matters because a US that wants to balance China needs a confident industrial Europe, not just a moralizing one. So, what should the US do? We could run an ideological crusade, democracy versus autocracy, and try to relive the Cold War. That has rhetorical power and some truth. Or we could go full deal maker realism, conceding spheres of influence and cutting bargains wherever we can. Neither frame is sufficient. The better test is brutally simple. Which system delivers for its people without humiliating self injury? Which builds safe, affordable cities, keeps inflation and shortages at bay, educates scientists while attracting them, and persuades allies that alignment is in their tangible interest. Do that, and the ideology writes itself. Rebuild the defense industrial base with deadlines, not slogans. Multi year appropriations for munitions, long term purchase agreements for hulls, surge capacity for drones, and a fast lane for proven systems that meet price and reliability targets. Score by throughput, not by PowerPoint. Make industrial policy boring and relentless. Keep funding chip fabs, battery plants, grid components, and advanced machine tools, but tie public money to yield curves, delivery schedules, and domestic workforce development. No check without an apprenticeship pipeline. No ribbon cutting without a 24-month ops plan. Permitting that favors the right projects quickly. Set presumptive timelines. If agencies miss them, projects proceed with conditions subject to clawbacks. Publish a national build list of strategic projects, transmission lines, ports, fabs, rail freight upgrades, and clear their paths. Environmental review should protect the environment, not paper it. A talent policy that thinks like a factory manager. Staple green cards to STEM PhDs from accredited programs. Create fast tracks for skilled trades immigration, welders, machinists, electricians, linked to specific regions and employers. Make it easy for Chinese, Indian, European, and Latin American engineers to pick the US because the lab works and the school is great for their kids. Science funding that connects to production. The NIH and NSF should have bench to line programs that fund not just discoveries, but the first pilot line, the first tool buy, the first quality system. Universities should earn bonuses for patents that ship, tax and procurements that reward building, full expensing for structures and equipment in strategic sectors, federal purchasing that sets open standards, avoids vendor lock in, and buys American when capacity exists. Use the government's checkbook to create reference customers for small, scrappy manufacturers. City making as a competitive advantage. The US does not have to mimic Shanghai's density to build cities that work. Upzone around transit, cut parking minimums, and streamline approvals for multifamily housing. If middle class families can afford to live near good schools and jobs, the talent stays. If not, they'll go where the trains run. Regulate with a ruler, not a hammer. Clarity beats improvisation. If you're going to restrict exports of leading edge chips, make the rule precise and stable. If you want social media safeguards, write guardrails once and enforce them. The economy runs on predictability. This is not a call to become China, it's a call to become ourselves again, confident, experimental, open to talent, allergic to fatalism, and comfortable with the idea that making things is a national strength, not a nostalgic hobby. What about China? Expect fewer speeches, more projects. The leadership will try to keep the dial steady, slow the property unwind without admitting error, keep factories humming, keep youth unemployment manageable, and keep discontent quiet. They will overbuild in some places and under-reform in others. They will continue to dominate segments of clean tech and industrial hardware while lagging in things that require free intellectual play. They will take pride in bridges, grids, and ships and remain uneasy about comedy clubs, investigative journalism, and unfenced campuses. They will also keep losing some of their people to emigration, and they will tolerate it because letting a fraction of the ambitious leave is cheaper than letting them organize at home. In the meantime, the serene empire model, dominant in its neighborhood, prickly about its dignity, pragmatic in its trade, will guide decisions. That's not the Soviet template. It's its own thing, and we need to take it on its own terms. If there is a flashpoint, it's Taiwan. The sobering truth is that the outcome of a rapid conflict close to China's shore depends not on speeches but on stockpiles, logistics, and timelines. The best way to avoid that war is to make it unwinnable. By hardening Taiwan's defenses, aligning allies, and demonstrating that the US and its partners can sustain a long, grinding war economy tempo if forced. Deterrence fails when your adversary thinks you will run out of parts. The rivalry will not end in 2027 with a single triumph of AI, nor in 2030 with a magical reshoring wave. It will look like two big countries wrestling the future decade after decade, sometimes snarling, sometimes dealing, always comparing notes on who actually delivers. The country that outlasts is the country that stops beating itself up. So here's the test I want you to keep. Next time you hear someone say China is winning or America is finished, ask who's laying track, who's cutting lead times, who's opening labs and filling classrooms, who's building ships and buying parts on time, who's making cities livable for families who don't have trust funds, who's letting the world's talent in and giving them something meaningful to build. If the US does those things, the rivalry will feel less like fate and more like competition, the kind that makes you better. If we don't, then yes, the 21st century could feel like it belongs to someone else. But the hour is not late because China is strong. It's late because we forgot how to be strong in the way that counts. By making, maintaining, and multiplying the real things that make a modern life work. Feel free to subscribe and see you next time.